Last Sam's Cage by David A. Poulsen. Chapter 2, page 18. The tiger blinked. It was a slow, lazy blink, almost like she was drifting off to sleep, but after a few seconds the large, careful eyes opened again, and they watched the boy sitting at the picnic table just outside the cat's enclosure. Eddie Slater was small for 15, but he was thinner than the most boys his age. More pale, too. Brown hair scattered itself haphazardly down over his forehead in the direction of deep-set, serious blue eyes. His face was longish and narrow, with bones that made sharp angles here and there. His chin jutted out over what some of the kids at school called his pencil neck. There was a rustling noise behind him. He quickly closed the worn notebook he'd been writing in and stood up, ready to move. The zoo had been closed to the public for a couple of hours, and he worried that a security guard on his rounds might be approaching. The noise had come from a cluster of spruce and poplar trees. Eddie clenched his fists nervously as he stared hard at the trees, trying to spot whomever or whatever had been doing the rustling. A magpie, vividly black and white, flapped down from a low branch of one of the poplars and landed on the ground close to Eddie. The bird loudly protested the presence of the stranger, then, apparently satisfied that it had made its feelings known, flew off in a low, straight line and disappeared quickly beyond other trees. Eddie relaxed and grinned. He realized his legs were shaking, gone just over half a day, and already his nerves were getting to him. He'd have to get a handle on that. This would be difficult enough without being spooked. Every time he heard a noise or saw a shadow, he sat back, down at the picnic table and opened the notebook again. In the margin, next to where he'd been writing earlier, he scribbled a note. First crisis. A stupid magpie. Get a grip. He looked up at the mother tiger for the last while. She hadn't paid him any attention. She'd been busy licking her baby and maneuvering it around with her nose, and she'd yawned a couple of times, but now she was looking intently at him. Get used to me, he told her. I live here now. Been living here for, I don't know, maybe 4.5 hours. I guess that makes us neighbors. He waved an arm at the enclosure, the trees and the picnic table. Nice place you got here. Eddie looked down at what he'd written. Want to hear this? He turned to face the tiger directly. She didn't move, but her baby curled in against her chest and closed its eyes. Actually, you don't have any choice, because I'm going to read it anyway. He pulled the book closer and stared down at the page. April 19. Evening. Last night I escaped. The weird thing is that I escaped at a place where all residents are locked up. Oh, they're treated real good and everything, but they can't just leave. I know what that's like. It feels strange to be here. The zoo has been closed for a couple of hours, and the only people I've seen since are zookeepers and zookeeper types. I guess they have to have people on duty all the time, and a few security guards are wandering around, mostly looking bored. The tiger looked like she was still paying attention, sort of. You want to know something strange? He asked. At school, I hated journal writing. Miss Shackleton, our English teacher, made us write something every day. Most days I didn't feel like writing about my life and stuff, so I just wrote about what TV shows I watched and junk like that. After a while, that got boring, so I started making stuff up. Like, one day I wrote about this gorgeous 22-year-old blonde babe who lived across the street and how she got undressed in front of her upstairs bedroom window every night. I even wrote about how she waved to me and touched her breasts to get me going. None of it was true, but I figured it would add a little excitement to Miss Shackleton's journal reading. Actually, there's an old couple living across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Hunt, and they're okay, except Mr. Hunt has Alzheimer's and he is sort of losing it a little. Anyway, Miss Shackleton told me I'd have to clean up my act, so I went back to writing about television and the movies, and now here I am, writing a journal, except I'm not going to call it a journal because journals are usually written for teachers, at least the ones you write in school. But this, whatever it's called, isn't for Miss Shackleton. Eddie looked up at the darkening red sky. This is for me. That's one thing Miss Shackleton said that I sort of liked. She talked about how the most important part of the writing process is the writing, even if nobody but the writer sees what's written. I guess that's how it is for journals and stuff like this. Oh yeah, and Miss Shackleton also talked about how you should consider your audience when you write. Well, audience, there it is. He held up the notebook for the tiger to see. Ready for some more? It's colder than the radio guys said it would be, but they always get it wrong. The dots are for Miss Shackleton. She loves dots. There's a name for them, but I forget what it is. If you wanted a good mark on your journal entry, you didn't write about chicks taking their clothes off, and you put in lots of dots, so there's some more. ... The Calgary Zoo, I've been here before. Once was with my grade 6 class. That was 4 years ago. I was here last summer too. Steve brought me. It was the day after he hit me with the iron and then wrapped its cord around my neck. Something in his eyes made it look like he wasn't going to stop choking me. He did though, and the next day he brought me here. The funny thing is, even though I was here with Steve, I still liked the place. It felt safe, I guess. And I remember thinking how great it would be if Steve just sort of forgot to take me home and left me here. Of course he didn't forget. I've got a place picked out to sleep in. It's a storage shed where they keep equipment and stuff. I checked it out a little while ago. It was locked, but getting in was easy. I doubt if the security guards bother with the place, and even if they do, I can hide behind some of the junk that's piled up in there. It should be okay, at least for a few nights. He looked up. The mother tiger was still staring at him. It seemed like forever since anyone had listened to anything he had to say for this long, and even though they were just tigers, it was still a nice feeling. Eddie looked away from the cage, and for a few minutes didn't say anything. When he spoke, his voice was soft and a little husky. We lived in a small town not far from here when I was a kid, a place called Long Prairie. I think my dad wanted to be a farmer, but couldn't afford to buy an actual farm. So he lived in that little town so Dad could at least be around farmers. He taught music lessons too. Once he told me he'd always wanted to be a professional musician, but I guess he never quite made it. He just gave lessons. Sometimes I think it must have been hard to be an almost farmer and an almost musician, but he didn't seem to mind. At least he never said anything. We had this beat-up old tent, and every spring and lots of times even before spring we'd be off to the mountains camping. We spent some cold nights out there, and a few times we had to brush snow off the tent in the morning. But Dad and me, We loved it. I don't think Mom minded it all that much either. On those early spring camping trips, Dad would cook breakfast. He had a deal with Mom. She cooked breakfast in July and August when it was warm, and Dad cooked it in what Mom called the winter months, which was all the other months of the year. We spent a lot of time outdoors. My dad was pretty good at it, and he taught me a lot of stuff. I guess that's why I'm not too worried about staying here by myself, even though it's not exactly camping. Then we moved into the city. It had something to do with money. Dad got a job here teaching music, so I guess that's why we came. I don't think my dad wanted to leave Long Prairie. He never laughed as much after that. I mean, we still had fun and everything, but it wasn't the same. A couple of years later, he died. It was some heart thing he'd had since he was a little kid that he never told anybody about. I went over to my friend's house one Saturday morning, and when I came home, my dad was dead. I was 10 years old then. Even though I missed my dad and everything, it wasn't so bad, just Mom and me. She worked long hours at this hotel restaurant, so we didn't see each other that much, but we got along pretty good. I learned to cook not too bad since. I had to make all my own meals, but that was okay too. I was even getting good marks at school. Then Mom met Steve and he moved in with us real fast. At first things were all right. He had a good job with the government and Mom got to be at home more, which I liked. Steve yelled a lot and he liked to say things that made you feel stupid, but that was about it. Then he lost his job. He said it was cutbacks, but I think they probably figured out what a jerk he really was. He was around more once he didn't have a job, and that's when I learned all about the real Steve. The first time he hit me was when I tried to stop him from pushing Mom around. He was shoving her up against the wall real hard, and then when she bounced off the wall, he'd slam her against it. She was crying and everything, so I jumped in to save her like I was Clint Eastwood or somebody. I didn't help much, maybe made things worse. He bounced Mom off the wall a few more times, and then gave me a crack across the face that puffed me up, so I could only see out of one eye for about a week. Eddie stopped. It hurt to think about that night, but it was sort of good to talk about it too, especially like this, with just two tigers listening. After that, Steve punching me got to be a regular thing. I guess the part I hated most was that Mom went along with it. She never once stood up for me, not that first time when I tried to help her on any other time either. I didn't see Steve beat on her anymore, though. Maybe he liked kicking the crap out of me better. Anyway, Mom never said a word about any of it. I saw a TV show once that said some women will side with the husband or the boyfriend when he's knocking the kids around, because they're afraid of losing the guy. I guess that's how it was for my mom. Or maybe she was just afraid, period. I missed quite a bit of school when I was healing up. Steve wouldn't let me go out of the house when I had bruises or cuts showing. Then when I got back to school, I get ragged on by the teachers or the vice principal for having so many absences. Eventually, Steve got pretty good at knowing where to hit. Even yesterday, I figured he'd totally lost it and might never stop. He didn't go for my face or arms, so just looking at me you'd never know unless I took off my shirt. Then you'd know real quick, except you'd probably think I got hit by a truck. I'm pretty much black from my chest down to just above my knees. I got a bad pain in my side too. I thought at first he'd busted one of my ribs, but it's not quite as bad right now, so I'm probably okay. Anyway, I better get writing. He looked at the tigers. All the stuff I just told you is going in my notebook. Eddie stood up and stretched his legs. They were starting to stiffen up as the night temperature dropped. I get the same way when it's cold and damp. The voice was somewhere behind him, and not far away. Eddie whirled around, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest.